Good evening and welcome to Wine and a Book 2025 and the 7th of 8 live book readings as part of Indie Author Week UK 2025, showcasing independent authors. And cheers. Wishing you health. So tonight I'm reading an extract from Scilly Birding, Joining the Madding Crowd, written by Simon, my husband, who died last year. This was actually traditionally published, one of a spattering of traditionally published books. Typos in it. So it is about his trip in 1984 to the Isles of Scilly. He had got the bug of twitching by going to the New Forest and seeing all the marauding hordes looking for two-barred crossbills in amongst a whole raft of normal crossbills. And then followed up by going in the autumn to the Isles of Scilly. I've promised boot-clad feet, and I've actually picked a reading that doesn't have boot-clad feet, so I'm putting in a little bit at the end, just to give the impression. Because birders, when they're after a bird, if they're en masse, it's a heavy thump, 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 like army manoeuvres, really. They can be fairly disciplined. It depends on who they are. Right. I'm off to see the Swainson's thrush, I announced as we made plans over breakfast. The giant had set his heart on going to St. Martin's, where he was convinced he was going to turn up the crippler of 1984. He was convinced that St. Martin's, an island rarely visited by birders, was underwatched, and that all kinds of amazing rarities were being missed as a result. He had been looking at the Field Guide to the Birds of North America and had set his heart on finding a worm-eating warbler to get his name into the ornithological history books. Worm-eating warblers are even pretty rare in the States, where they come from. He was going around the bungalow, psyching himself up by singing catchphrases such as, "One tick at a time, that's all I ask, sweet Jesus, one tick at a time." He sang this to the tune of a pop song, which was popular at the time. I can't remember which one it was. If it wasn't this, he would be shouting, "Come on, you cripplers," as a football fan might shout, "We are the champions." Chris and Tessa were still fast asleep, so that just left Clive. He decided he would stay on St. Mary's and see what he could turn up for himself. As I left for the quay and the boat for St. Agnes, it was a brilliant, warm and sunny day. What a wonderful contrast it was to the weather of yesterday and the day before. On my way down to the quay, I noticed that the view through my binoculars wasn't very clear. I looked through them in reverse and to my horror could see a small disc of grey condensation on the inside of the large lens. By the time I arrived at the quay, the disc had grown and completely covered the whole of both lenses. Looking through them, my view was reduced to a milky haze. This was infuriating. In my opinion, my binoculars were far from cheap, and they had let me down at this crucial moment when I was off to see a rare American visitor. Someone with similar binoculars explained that the barrels of the binoculars could be unscrewed and that by pointing them at the sun, the condensation should evaporate, particularly on a warm, sunny day like the one we had. In fact, compared with the price of top-of-the-range binoculars that shouldn't let in water in this way, my binoculars were really very cheap. They were. It did improve on them later. But at that time, I did not know this. Much later, I discovered that unscrewing binoculars is an unwise thing to do. The inside of binoculars is treated with a very carefully applied film of grease. Once disturbed, this becomes smeared, and the binoculars are costly to repair as a result. By unscrewing the barrels, the binoculars also become less watertight. In spite of taking this drastic action, I could still see that there was condensation on the prisms deep inside the binoculars. I felt a wave of desperate frustration pass through me. They were still virtually useless, and there seemed to be nothing I could do about it, especially as I was sitting on a boat about to leave for St. Agnes. The boat was about to depart when someone woke me from my deliberations by calling my name. There on the quay stood the jolly green giant. "I thought you were off to Martin's," I observed. He was far from amused. "I was the only one who wanted to go," he grumbled. "They wouldn't put a boat on just for me, so I'll have to come to St. Agnes with you after all." He was very fed up. As we sped across to St. Agnes, my mood improved by the minute because my binoculars improved rapidly, no doubt, in the sun. The giant explained that he had had the same problem with his telescope. In many ways, his telescope was his trademark. I've already stated that he was a pretty big bloke. His telescope was correspondingly small, just about a foot long. The telescope was attached to a monopod just over 6 feet tall. The whole thing looked rather like an out-of-proportion polo stick, and he was never without it, and he is also the cover image of the book. Once we had disembarked, we proceeded towards the post office once more. A small group of birders were watching a melodious warbler, so we joined them. It was a charming little grey bird with a bright yellow throat and a colourful beak, diving in and out of a dense pittosporum hedge, looking for food. Melodious warblers often have a yellow patch beneath the beak in the autumn, but this one was almost rivaling the yellow throat in terms of brilliance. "It's stained with caterpillar juice," exclaimed the giant. We walked on towards the parsonage and the Swainson's thrush. Every crack and gap in the wall which surrounded the parsonage had an expectant birder crouched against it. At the entrance to the parsonage itself was a queue of people, birders waiting in turn to go into the garden and try for a glimpse of the bird of the moment. Arrangements had been made with the owners to allow about 30 people in at a time. One or two of the old hand Scilly Birders had taken it upon themselves to organise things for us. The bird hadn't put in an appearance since 7:30 that morning, so there was a very long queue. Brian and I decided that for the moment at least, attempting to see the Swainson's thrush was a fool's errand. As a result, we spent the rest of the morning wandering around the island, doing some proper birding, as Brian put it. It was a glorious morning with the sun shining strongly. We saw prodigious numbers of common migrants, and there were lots of butterflies flitting about. It was hard to believe that it really was October. A fat and self-satisfied tabby cat brushed against my leg. "And how many exhausting American vagrants have you eaten recently?" I asked it. "I bet you've had that Swainson's. Was it tasty?" After being stroked and petted, it slunk off into the undergrowth, no doubt to cause grief to yet more cripplers. At midday, we decided we would slink off down to the Turk's Head ourselves. There was nothing further to report as we passed the queue at the parsonage. Over lunch, we made the decision to abandon the Swainson's thrush and go over to Gugh, G-U-G-H, instead. It is a small island separated from St. Agnes, except at low tide, when they are joined by a pebble causeway. It is almost as rarely visited by birders as St. Martin's, and therefore had a distinct attraction for the giant, who was still determined to find his very own crippler. We were relaxing happily in the sun, having finished an excellent prawn salad lunch, washed down by an equally excellent pint, when a birder rushed up announcing excitedly, "The last lot who've just come out of the parsonage saw the Swainson's. It showed at around 12:30. "We'd better go and see if we can get into the parsonage, I suppose," said the giant with little enthusiasm. He wasn't going to get his chance to locate his very own crippler after all. We headed for the parsonage and joined the queue. Birders were being allowed 1 hour stints. After we had waited half an hour, despondent birders shuffled out unenthusiastically. Did you see it? We asked. 1 or 2 of us at the front did, one of them grumbled as he came out. Hardly worth it, though. All I saw was something brown dive into the bushes, which could have been absolutely anything. In many ways, I wish I hadn't seen it, because I certainly can't tick it. I don't think any of the others at the front did that much better. We waited an hour while the next group went in. They were totally unsuccessful, and then it was our turn. In we filed. We settled ourselves on the grass as quietly as possible, and then there was complete silence. In front of us, the ground sloped gently away. A few feet from the people at the front, the first gnarled apple tree of the orchard blocked our view. The cover was so good, it was very difficult to see more than a few yards in any direction, and the whole orchard was surrounded by walls and dense hedges. I had managed to get one of the better spots, as I had reasonable sight lines both to left and right. The time passed by with almost imperceptible slowness. Occasionally there was a slight rustle, as someone tried to relieve the agonies of cramp. Someone struck a match in order to have a cigarette. The whole assembled company glared at him in disapproval. An immature goldcrest appeared in a bush momentarily, and a melodious warbler hopped around in the canopy above us, searching for insect larvae. Most of us were suffering from some degree of cramp by the time our hour had passed. "Time's up," announced an organising birder in a loud whisper. Time's up. Gratefully, we stretched our legs as we stood up and shuffled out to let the next group in. Most of our lot wandered off down the road, but Brian and I decided to join the queue again and try for another go. After the next batch had gone in, there was still room for 1 or 2 more. So Brian and I went in for a second stint of suffering. The second hour was almost as uneventful as the first. Someone saw a brown bird in dense vegetation to the right, which he thought might have been it. After the second hour, we stood up with an urgent need to stretch our legs. When we emerged, we bumped into Chris and Tessa. "Any luck?" they asked. "Not a chance," we replied, "and that's after a couple of hours." "Well, you'll be lucky now we're here," said Chris with a confident smile, and we joined them reluctantly to file in a third time. We hadn't settled down for more than a few moments when our silence was rudely broken by the owner of the house next door returning home. The gate squeaked noisily on unoiled hinges, and a dog barked its greeting. "Do you want a cup of tea?" his wife asked cheerily. It seemed odd that outside the parsonage orchard, life continued, unaffected by the Swainson's thrush only a few yards away from us. It wasn't many minutes before silence descended on us all once again. "Swainson's thrush is in the garden next door," someone announced, coming down into the orchard from the gate. He made absolutely no attempt to lower his voice, and we all turned to face him. "It's in the middle of the lawn, pulling up worms," he continued. There was an immediate shuffle of relief, followed by the beginnings of a scramble to the gate. "There's no point in leaving here and trying to see it," he added quickly. "There's only one hole in the wall you can see it from, and there's a bloke in front of it who's been waiting all day, and several behind him waiting desperately for a glimpse. You're much better off here, because the last I heard it was moving gradually in this direction." We waited with renewed enthusiasm. It seemed incredible, but perhaps there was just the outside chance we might see this bird after all. It still came as a surprise when a tawny brown bird the size of a wheat ear hopped up from nowhere onto a tree stump no more than 5 feet in front of me. It held its beak in the air at a tilt, giving it an air of haughty disdain. Moustachial stripes behind its beak added to its superior demeanour. It looked a lot like a song thrush, except that the spotting on the breast was confined to a smaller area below the chin and was less conspicuous. The bird was also a less rich brown. It sat motionless on that stump for 1 long minute, maybe more. "That's a Swainson's thrush," I thought to myself as comprehension began to dawn. It cannot possibly be anything else. It seemed strange that there was absolutely no reaction from any of the stunned and silent birders around me. It certainly says a lot for their self-control that no one even gasped. Thank goodness everyone had the presence of mind to realise that if anyone made the slightest noise or movement, it would be gone. The views we were enjoying were crippling, if not thoroughly stonking. After posing for us on the stump, it hopped up onto a branch of one of the apple trees for a second or two, and then flew up into the higher branches of the oak trees above. The views on the stump were the best. All in all, we probably watched it for at least 10 minutes. These were certainly the best views anyone had had of this particular Swainson's thrush so far. We left the parsonage with a feeling of both relief and elation. Whether any more birders went into the parsonage that afternoon, I don't know. I rather doubt it. Most of the other birders who had visited St Agnes that day had given it up as a bad job. We went down to the quay and took the boat back to St Mary's. Right, short bit about feet. And this was a few days later with more birds under his belt. At 6 o'clock the next morning, I was woken by the sound of boots hammering past just outside the bungalow. Dawn had scarcely broken. They're at it already, I thought smugly, meaning the desperate birders outside trying for the rustic bunting. Waves of boots in a desperate hurry pounded past. I wonder if they're onto it, I mused with glorious detachment, and went back to sleep again peacefully to dream of further cripplers. It must have been 8 o'clock when I woke again. I got dressed and walked across the dew-carpeted playing fields to the remnants of the rustic bunting crowd. Any luck? I inquired. Nah, they replied. No chance. I reckon it's long gone. I heard some lucky bastard had it all to himself yesterday evening. Then the crowds turned up and that was that. Anyone seen it this morning? I asked, deciding not to be drawn into the temptation of admitting that I was that lucky bastard, which is why he had to sleep in. So it's a story of a rite of passage. It's definitely got the hero's journey lurking in it. Yeah, stuffy book. So thank you very much for joining me tonight. And where are we? If you're interested in learning more about the book, especially if you want to buy a copy, I do have some copies, sadly not signed by Simon, on my website, www.tiliapublishinguk.co.uk. And it is still on Amazon as well, which goes through to the publisher, and they supply them. Again, not signed by Simon. The price is £9.9. No, the price is £8.99. I think, something like that. Sorry, oops. Tomorrow night is the last of this year's book readings, and I'm going back to the church's book and some madcap vicars, rectors, curates. There's a highwayman curate, there's a lighthouse vicar, and there's the notorious Reverend Kemp from East Meon and other parishes, and his tithing of turnips act, which may or may not have triggered the Tithe Commutation Act of the following year in 1836. So thank you very much for joining me, and wishing you a very good rest of your evening, and cheers. Thank you.